write out a card and we can collect those, and then Josie kind of at the end can kind of just go through them and kind of give suggestions on different behaviors or things that you might need some help with. So I will, thank you, Josie, for coming.
Oh, you're very welcome. So hi, my name is Josie Tereski, and I'm an occupational therapist. I've been practicing for 9 years, and I started with medically fragile children in Las Vegas, and then moved up here, and I now work in school districts. I also work in the Birth to 3 program for rural areas, and I'm currently in the process of becoming a certified feeding therapist. So, just a little bit about me. I did get my certification for sensory processing integration from USC. So hopefully I can use some of that background knowledge for you guys this evening. So tonight, I feel like when I was thinking about this presentation, I could probably talk for months about it. I'm very passionate about it and helping people look through the lens of sensory processing when it comes to behaviors. So I think having more of that open conversation with everyone about it is probably be more beneficial because there's just so much we could cover. But the handout that I handed out just kind of goes over a little bit of the basics of sensory. As everyone, when you think about sensory, you think about, auditory, taste, smell, touch. But there's a couple different sensory processing or sensory systems that we don't necessarily think about all the time, and that's our proprioceptive input, and that's what helps us know where our body is in space. You have receptors in your muscles and joints that help you understand when you either get pressure or pulling at your muscles and joints, you get feedback to tell you where your body is in space. And then there's the vestibular input, which helps you with your balance and just knowing how to keep your balance whenever that fluid in your inner ear starts to move. That's what tells you how to correct your body in space as well. Proprioceptive and vestibular typically work very closely to help you function throughout life. So the first area we'll talk about is your auditory system. And I think one of the most common behaviors a lot of people will see like in the classrooms, I'm gonna say, is kids covering their ears when they go into an assembly or things like that. And so being mindful about the auditory input environmentally. On the other side, so there's loud noises, which we are all very aware of, but also like lights, humming. So fluorescent lights a lot of times will hum. I know there's a lot of like hearing aids and other hearing equipment, and that can change how someone is processing auditory information as well. And so keeping that in mind when we're working with the auditory system. So there's different activities and strategies. Headphones is one of the most common for those loud noise, but a lot of times kids need just like a calming repetitive noise, like sound machines to help calm and regulate. Other things could be like just having that quiet space that they can go to and not having all that auditory input all the time so that their body has a chance to recover and regulate. And then moving on to olfactory, that's going to tie into like feeding. So you might see that your kiddo eats a certain texture and they're constantly gagging, and it's always that one texture, whether it's a really popular one is noodles mixed with like a marinara sauce. They love noodles and they love sauces and soups, but you mix them together and the kiddo's gagging. So that's that sensory system telling us that they're not processing that information correctly orally, and so their body is putting them in kind of a fight or flight response, and that's where we get that gagging because their body thinks that it's protecting itself. And then we also have like refusal to use like utensils and things like that, so that's going to be a preference to a certain type of utensil, whether it's metal or plastic, those types of things. So when we think of all those things, those are those behaviors in our, when I say behaviors, it's our child's way of communicating. So every behavior is a way of communicating. If they can't tell us verbally, their body is going to be telling us something. So that's what I mean when I say behavior. Some other oral motor activities are like blowing bubbles, whistles, using jewelry. So there's different ways to get other oral input or help them learn to process oral information correctly. Proprioceptive, so that's that input for that body awareness. This can come in two different ways. Either they're really hypersensitive to it and they seek it out and they love it, and those are your climbers, your jumpers, your spinners. They want all of that input and they're constantly moving, and you're like, my child never runs out of energy. That's what they're seeking out. So finding ways that we can help them. So whether that's with bear hugs, trampoline, heavy work. I don't know if anyone's heard of heavy work, but that's that pushing and pulling with their muscles and joints on heavy things. I brought my lion tonight because he's weighted, and that's a really common one that people will use as weighted items. Or they're very, they're hyposensitive to it. So they're the kiddos that you see like laying on the table all the time or on their desk, and you just can't get them alerted enough to want to engage. They just look tired all the time. Tactile, either they want to touch everything and they're walking down the hallways, rubbing the walls, or they might be more aversive to it, and so you see them staying away. They don't want to touch their food, and they don't want to have messy hands, messy faces, those types of things. And then tactile is not always just your hands, but that might come into play with certain types of clothing, different things within the environment like walking on sand, grass, carpet, showing those aversions to those things. Vestibular, getting the fluid in your inner ear moving. So those kiddos that are just constantly moving, again, they like to flip upside down, they lay in their chair upside down. Any time that they put their head in a different plane other than like that upright position, they're activating their vestibular system, so that can be very calming for some kids, so that's why they seek out that different positioning. So you can do different activities like freeze dances, you can do spinning, hanging upside down, but taking them to the park and really activating that vestibular system to get them that input that they need is going to be important. And then the last one is visual. Some of the kiddos might seem really visually distracted, so you're talking to them and they're just constantly looking around at everything else in the environment but you. They might have a hard time if you give them like a worksheet or a coloring page that's just filled with everything and they're like, I don't know where to start. It's their visual system not processing what they're seeing, and so they're having a hard time figuring out where do I start with this activity. Or they might seek out that visual input. So wheel spinning, you'll have a kiddo flip over a car and they just spin that wheel and they really get excited by watching that wheel spin. And that's because they're seeking that visual input. So you can do things that really target that visual input. You might turn off the lights and play flashlight tag. You can, if a kiddo is really distracted by their environment, decreasing the clutter in their room. A lot of parents are like, my kid has all the toys in the world, but they don't play with any of them. They just kind of dump out every container and then that's it. They might be visually overstimulated, so if you take away and only have like 4 or 5 toys out, then they're going to play with those toys because they can process what they're seeing and they have a lot easier time figuring out how they're going to initiate and play. I Spy is a really good activity for kids that seek out that visual input, and then sensory bottles.
What's that? I Spy?
Like I Spy books.
Oh.
Yeah, yep. Or, I mean, you can even do it in the natural environment, like, you know, if they're having problems. Some kids, if you take them to Costco, they get really overstimulated. And so sometimes giving them something to focus on, so like I spy a red wagon while you're going down the aisle, that's gonna help them try and focus on something to help them. So I kind of jumped into this, but I was talking earlier about sensory processing, and I think most of you probably, if not, heard of sensory processing disorder. I use the term disorder very loosely because we are all sensory human beings, and that's how we process our environment and learn to engage with our environment. So I tend to use our sensory preferences or sensory differences rather than disorder. I think that disorder is not a harsh term, but that just means that something's wrong, and it's not that something's wrong, it's just that your body is processing the sensory input that they're getting in a different way. And we need to help your body learn to process that information so that it doesn't feel like it's under attack, and then it sends your central nervous system into that fight or flight. I think most of the time people think of sensory processing disorder when it's like meltdown after meltdown, and you're like, why is my kiddo having these behaviors? That's when I feel like that sensory processing disorder comes into play. But again, if we can teach the kiddo to process what information is triggering their system to feel like it's under attack, then we can help them understand their body and why they're having that reaction, and then you're not going to have that big of reaction. They still might not have like that preference to whatever that input is, but they can understand it more and then have an appropriate response to that that input. I'll give you mine too. I don't like touching chalk. I think it's disgusting and it makes me nauseous when I touch chalk. But kids that I play with love playing with chalk. Do I have a meltdown? No, I do not. But if I have a choice, I will choose markers over chalk. So that's kind of one of them. The other one is when I chew bubble gum. I cannot chew one piece of bubble gum. I have to put 3 pieces in my mouth to get extra input, because I need that extra input when I'm chewing. I don't chew it for very long, but I will shove 3 pieces in and I will chomp, 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 and then I'm ready. So if you all think about it, you probably have some sensory differences or preferences that you can think about that you're like, oh yeah, I do that. Or when you were in school and taking tests and you had that one person sitting next to you chomping the bubble gum and you're like, what are you doing? I can hear you. That's their way of regulating themselves. Do they have a disorder? No, they do not. It's just they have learned that that's how they regulate their body when they're stressed out or their body is feeling like they can't tolerate what's going on around them right now, and so that's how they regulate. And so that's kind of the overall goal with sensory and behavior is we have a kiddo that is having a behavior due to some type of sensory input that's not a preference for them, and we're seeing from the outside a behavior that they're doing to try and regulate because of that input that may not be considered appropriate. So we got to help them understand why they're doing it, and then how can we kind of change that behavior to be something that's more appropriate, but that's still going to allow them to get that input to regulate and kind of process that information so that they can continue on and engage with whatever is going on. I also, as a parent, say choose your battles, because there might be some things that, like some kids, they don't want to wear jeans. Okay, so you have, if wearing jeans in your family is appropriate or is a priority, then okay, we can work on that. But if that's not something that's impacting their daily life and ability to be a kiddo and engage and do things, then I would say that that's something that we learn about and see if there's other areas within that tactile system that's impacting them. But it might not be necessarily something that we have to think, oh, well, we have to get this kid wearing jeans within the next 6 months. I don't know. So it's just something to think about as you're thinking about your kiddos and the sensory stuff. There is always ways that we can help the body kind of process that information and learn to not register it and have those fight or flight responses. But I also think it's important to keep an individual lens on your kid, because we all are different and that's what makes us special. So we don't need to fix every single sensory preference and difference in all of us. So I think I'll kind of stop there and ask if there's questions so far. Regarding, yeah.
So I guess if you have a kid that spins often,
yeah.
And you're in the grocery store, or places that he is spinning, or those type of things, I just wonder what are strategies, or so you're looking at each little time that they're doing it, or?
Yeah, so this is usually when you kind of start working with an OT to develop what we call a sensory diet. So identifying when those times are that are really impacting because of, you know, a kiddo seeking out sensory input. So spinning, we know he's trying to get that vestibular input. So how are we going to give him that input so that they can then go into the grocery store and they aren't spinning down the aisles and bumping into everyone, knocking stuff off the shelves. So we need to think of prepping his body for the grocery store, say. So we can do, like, an easy way would be to get his body and his head in a different plane. So maybe you guys pull up to the grocery store, you park, and you're like, okay, we're going to sit in the back seat and we have to put our head down and try and touch the ground 5 times, and then we're going to stand up and get out of the car. So we just gave him that vestibular input that we know he's going to seek when he gets into the grocery store. And he or she is probably doing it in the grocery store because grocery stores can be pretty overstimulating. Fluorescent lighting, it's an open space, there's a lot of noise and unexpected things that can happen. So that's how they're regulating when they get in that grocery store. So if we can get him well regulated before we take him into an environment that we know is really challenging for them, they aren't going to hit what we call like their sensory threshold as quickly. He might still get there, and it's going to be kind of a trial and error thing where, you know, we do it the 5 times, we go in the grocery store, 5 minutes in, we're already spinning. Okay, he needs more input before we get into that grocery store. So that might be that you guys, you take him and you do some of that, or you know, we spin all the way into the grocery store and then, we got to the door, so now we're going to stop our spinning and we're gonna walk in. But you'll have to play with that time frame to see how much input they truly need to stay regulated. And when I was talking about the threshold, we all have that threshold of like, okay, I'm done. I get it at Costco. I don't know about anybody else, but Sundays at Costco, I hit it pretty quickly. But knowing like how we can get him really well regulated so that his system's down here and say his threshold's here, it's going to take a lot longer if they're regulated to hit that threshold where they're like, okay, I'm done, I need a break, or now I need to spin and get regulated. If you take a kiddo that's not regulated, he was already screaming in the car, he's frustrated, he didn't want to go to the grocery store in with you, and you're like, nope, we just got to get in there really quick, and we haven't prepped his sensory system and got him regulated before, then he's probably already here, and it's going to take that one little, you know, shriek of a grocery cart wheel, and then, we're at threshold, so now we got to get spinning, or we might have that meltdown. So it's really important to think how, just knowing when those challenging times are for your child, so that we can prep their sensory system with the things that they need to regulate and seek out to regulate ahead of time, so that we're not backtracking. If we wait for that meltdown, sometimes it can be a lot harder to backtrack and be like, okay, now we have to get regulated, and now we're in the middle of Costco, and this is going to be hard. Although he was seeking vestibular input, proprioceptive input is magical, and that's that heavy work. And so not everyone, but a lot of people seek proprioceptive input to regulate. That's why yoga is very popular, working out is very popular, because you're giving your body that input that it needs to its muscles and joints. So there's a lot of activities you can do that gives that heavy work and proprioceptive input during those challenging environments also. An example would be, have your kiddo, if they're capable, have them pushing that cart, because pushing that cart is going to give them that heavy work that they might need to help them stay regulated just a little bit longer while they're in that grocery store. Taking a weighted blanket or a weighted animal into the grocery store and they have to carry that, or having them pick up the cans and having them put them into the grocery cart, or different heavy items into the grocery cart that's safe for their body, obviously. But just giving them that little bit of extra heavy work might help them stay regulated a little bit longer too. Yes?
What would be some examples of when they're seeking proprioceptive input? Like, are there some common, like, okay, you need some heavy work? that you see?
Yeah, climbing on top of tables and jumping off. Crashing, crashing into others, or purposely falling on the ground. They'll get running and they just, and they love that falling and that high impact feeling. That's when you can know, like, oh, they're trying to regulate, and so how can we help him regulate that's appropriate? Not saying that he can't jump on the ground, but it might not be safe. So how can we redirect that and say, oh, I'm seeing you need, you need some help with keeping your body safe, so we can do this. So those are two big ones that I was here. They climb on top of everything. They can climb a bookshelf. They jump off of everything. Those are definitely the two that I probably hear the most. Another one is playing rough with their peers or their siblings. Like, they're such a sweet kid, but they're constantly like shoving and pushing. And again, we're getting that input to our joints. It's not that we're trying to be aggressive and hurting our siblings or peers, but if we're overstimulated and they're already in our bubble and we don't know how to respond and communicate, like, you're in my bubble, then I'm gonna do this because it's going to give me really good input and then it's gonna help me regulate. And so then they start to learn, like, that feels really good, so I'm gonna do that. I joke with some parents when they come in, when I used to work in a clinic, I used to be like, well, your kid might be a football player someday, because they love that high impact and it just feels good to their body. It's not that it's wrong, but we also need to know when it's appropriate to get that input and what are other ways we can get it in appropriate and different environments. So.
Sorry, I can keep going, guys. What about the spinning of the wheels? That's, that's obviously visual.
Visual,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So typically I will, because it can become a stimming thing too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different factors, and that's with all sensory stuff. Like, there's a lot of different factors that go into all the different sensory behaviors. So you can't always just use the sensory lens, but from the sensory lens of it, kiddos with sensory differences that have difficulties processing, they like repetitive routines, motions, everything, auditory, the repetitiveness, because it's predictable and their system knows how to process it. They don't have to build that new pathway to process that information. So like a wheel spinning, it's visually probably, it's regulating for them because they don't really have to think about it, for lack of a better way of saying it. They just know, like, I'm getting the visual input that I want and I know exactly how this wheel is going to move right here. It's just going to go in a circle. So it's very calming.
Okay.
Yeah. When I have kiddos do it, I will typically let them do it. I'll be like, okay, you have 20 seconds and then we need to stop it and then we need to do this work. So whenever I have a kiddo doing that, I want to be able to see that we can transition from something that they need, but then you have to show me that that regulated you to then produce, an appropriate
Perform the task.
perform the task, thank you. So I don't want to just sit there and like, oh, well, Tommy spun the wheel for 60 minutes and he had a great session. No, like, yes, I want him to get that, but I also want to be able to show that we can, redirect. Sometimes giving parents other ways of getting that visual input. So that's like where, like, lava lamps are really popular again, I see them in stores, but giving them other options for you getting visual input, so we're not just going to every wheel that we see in an environment and wanting to spin it, so, because that's calming for us. So.
Do you see kids grow out of that by themselves?
No. I don't see them grow out of it. I see them adapt and find new ways to get that input. And usually as adults, you learn to appropriately, get that input in different ways. So it's not that it goes away or, they grow out of it. It's just that they typically learn new ways to get that input, and their needs and desires for it will change.
But the new ways they find are similar ways? Because I noticed my son, like, he did that when he was younger, and then we got strobe lights, and then he kind of started liking those, and he really doesn't care for the spinning of the wheel anymore. It's more like how things work.
Yeah.
Like how cars work.
Right.
But now, that's why I was like, did he just like grow out of that?
No, he replaced it with like probably the strobe lights, and then like the learn how things work. I mean, as our cognitive, skills change and grow too, then, he might still have that interest in like cars and things, but he gets that visual input in other ways, so he doesn't necessarily have to utilize the wheels and repetitiveness of that, to calm down.
So, do you see it often that like auditory will overstimulate or something, and then you have to cross to another area of sensory, like proprioceptive or visual, to read? So not just taking the light sensitivity or the hearing that's loud, but you actually have to cross into another modality to get you back to regulation?
Yes, I think I understand what you're asking. So, like with auditory, like if a kiddo is really sensitive and they get overstimulated with auditory, are there other means, like other sensory systems to
Yeah.
use to regulate? Yeah. And that's where typically that proprioceptive is kind of my initial go-to. It might not be the only thing we use with a kiddo, but it's a pretty, I would say 90% of my kiddos, you can use some heavy work and help them regulate and get them regulated again. Typically though, you want to think if your kiddo is overstimulated and you're like, oh, I think that my child's overstimulated this environment, the first thing to do is try and remove as many of the sensory inputs that the kiddo is getting first. So it might be turning off the lights. Okay, now we've taken out the visual stimuli that the sensory system is getting. Oh, and now we've also eliminated like the humming of fluorescent lighting. And maybe you need to turn on the noise machine because that's a very consistent sound. So even though there might be sounds that you don't hear, if your kiddo's sensitive to sound or they're having problems processing auditory input, you need a consistent noise so that they don't hear those kind of background noises that you aren't registering on in your sensory system. So remove as much as you can, and then use, I'm going to say for the general population, that proprioceptive input, heavy work to help them kind of regulate and get back to their baseline where they need to be to go.
Do you have examples of what good heavy work would be specifically? Like my kids get wild when we get home from school, and it's like running, jumping on the furniture, things you can't remove. I can't take, like on the couch, like the rest of the house.
Yep.
And they feed off each other.
Yeah, yes, I do. And I also want to touch on the school thing where kiddos come home from school too. But I would say having a routine. So kiddos that have problems with sensory processing or sensory differences, they like routine too, so that it's expected. So I would usually set up a routine, and this is typically part of a sensory diet that I will set up with the family. And it's very family dependent because you need to do kind of what's your lifestyle. But animal walks is a really good one. And so with my kiddo that's in preschool, we do obstacle courses when he gets home. And I wouldn't say that he's a huge seeker, but he is emotionally drained when he comes home. And so just giving him that extra input helps him regulate and kind of get back to baseline, and then we can start adding demands from there of like, okay, what homework do you have? It's time to get your plate out for dinner, those types of things. I have a worksheet I'm going to give you guys that has some stuff. If you Google heavy work though, I mean, Pinterest is full of them. Most of the stuff is pretty safe if you Google heavy work, but sometimes I will do a laundry basket and fill it up with as much heavy stuff or just books in it and have them push it up and down the hallway. That's a really good heavy work activity. Filling a blanket with a bunch of their stuffed animals and having them try and pull it up some stairs. That's going to be really good heavy work. YouTube has a lot of like little guided yoga classes. So sometimes like a Disney yoga class that they can do, because then they're holding those static positions and it's going to give them some good heavy work. Sometimes it might be you have a quiet corner at home and hey, we get home, it's 10 minutes in the quiet corner, you can either read books or you can just relax and listen to music, but giving them that time to just kind of shut down. And that brings me to the school. a lot of schools might report to you like, your kiddo doesn't do anything at, school. They're so great. They follow the rules. There's no behaviors. And you're like, well, why do they get home and they just kind of blow up? So that's their safe space. And a lot of kiddos with sensory differences, you'll see that at school, they're just like trying to hold it together and they're trying to keep it all in and process. But when they get home, they just kind of release. And then that's that kind of breaking point for them. So they're trying to hold it together. And I hear about this being a school of T and clinical, is that the parents are like, the school said they're not doing any of this, but then we get home and, it's any type of little demand that I put on them and it's just a trigger. Well, they probably were, their thresholds here all day long were here, and then we get home and it's like, okay, now I'm going to melt down. So that's something to think about too, if it's just that transition home, maybe give them that 10 to 15 minutes to get that heavy work or that quiet time and then place those demands. A lot of kiddos that are high seekers too, they do better with the structure. So not just being like, hey, you got 15 minutes to, go wild and get all your energy out. It's more helpful to have like an obstacle course where you need to do a bear walk down the hallway, and then you're gonna pull your brother back on a sheet, back down the hallway, and then you're gonna push the laundry basket, but giving them like 4 or 5 steps and having it be very structured is going to make it easier for them to get that input and process it rather than just like a free-for-all, because then, if they're seekers, I mean, why not? I'm gonna throw all the couch cushions off, I'm gonna jump on them, I wanna climb, because they're still getting that input. It's just not in a way us moms would like to see our couch cushions used, our dads. So just finding a way that you can give them what they're wanting. They want that heavy work in a more appropriate and safe and functional way. If you pick up groceries on the way home, have them carrying in the grocery bags, because that's that heavy work. So put them to work.
Personally, I go straight home, because I have a 45-minute drive home.
Okay, don't go grocery shopping, but
then,
have them hopefully it doesn't snow anymore, but get them out shoveling the snow, because that's heavy work again. In the summer, give them a shovel, digging holes. Those are all, anything where they're doing physical labor is going to be heavy work. So it's not child labor. It's good for their system. So.
I have a question real quick. Can you tell us more about the obstacle courses? Like what kinds of things you set up for your kids?
Yeah. So I do a lot of putting one of the kids on like a sheet and having them pull them around and do like a train, and I'll put on a silly kid song that you have to pull them around till the song's over. I personally have like, we call them the river stones, that are like different levels of stones. But you can use like books too, that they have to hop maybe a couple book to book for a couple of them. And then the animal walks I love, because you can do like the crowd walk, the bear walk, even just being on their belly and pulling with their arms if you have hardwood floors is really good to get that input. If they need more vestibular input, maybe you have them lay on the couch and go backwards so they're upside down, and they have to grab like a flashcard and tell you what animal it is or what letter if they're a little bit older. I will say adding in cognitive components and educational components sometimes challenges that system a little bit more. So if you have a really high seeking kiddo, it's helpful to add a more cognitive component, because they're focusing more and challenging both the cognitive and the sensory tends to help them regulate a little bit quicker, and you're not like having them do an obstacle course for an hour. Trying to think of what else I do. My kiddos all have to carry in a bag of groceries, but you can fill like even a pillowcase with something heavier. Fill socks with like beans, or a pillowcase with beans, making anything heavy. You want it to be about 3% of their body weight, just for safety reasons. So for that, carrying things around. And that goes for weighted blankets and things too. Those are pretty popular now, so think about 3% of your child's body weight, which isn't very much. So some of those commercial blankets that you can buy are heavy. I'm trying to think. I do like Simon Says, so that way you can, if you have them like copy your body movements, that's visual input, but also you can have them touching their toes or, you know, spinning in circles, so that's giving them some of that input too, and it's structured. So your hand.
Our kid discovered the Easter basket and cans from the pantry and carries them around.
Oh, okay.
So he's making his own heavyweight.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's clever because it works. He'll just grab the Easter basket, fill it up with all the cans from the pantry, and walk around with it, and then put it back in, and then walk out.
Yep,
It's
yeah.
nothing.
So that's his
No toes being
natural,
smushed.
yeah, and that's a natural way for him to seek that. So that's, I mean, that's great. I would say that's a functional way for him to get that input. Washing stuff is really good, so giving them like a paper towel and having to clean tabletop, they're having to push. Teachers, I tell them to clean the whiteboard, have the kid clean the whiteboard so they can get that input. Wash windows, that'd be really good. So there's a lot of like household things that you can have them do, so that way you're not, you know, stopping your whole daily routine, like, okay, we got a 10-minute obstacle course. Like, you can build it into the chores too, and that's why when I said like a family's lifestyle, I think it's really important to take into consideration like what your lifestyle is. You drive 45 minutes, so what are things that we could give your kiddo to do to regulate in the car ride home? I'm thinking TheraBand and like pulling that, because that's gonna give really good input. Giving them a chewy or crunchy snack. We didn't talk a whole lot about that, but when you eat really chewy or crunchy things like bubble gum, you're giving proprioceptive input to your jaw. Your cervical spine are considered really small joints, and the smaller the joint, the more input that it registers. So if you eat crunchy or chewy things, it's going to register as a lot more proprioceptive input, so that's something you can do in the car. Another thing is like the Contigo water bottles that are a little bit harder to suck on. That's, again, we're working on our proprioceptive input to our jaw, so that can be regulating for kids. That's something else I do with a lot of my kids in classrooms, is they have that Contigo water bottle so that they're starting to get overstimulated, take a drink of water, and then it helps them kind of come back down.
I know like the fidget spinners and poppets are really popular. Do you recommend those? Do you find those to be useful tools?
Yes, as a tool. From experience, I see them, parents buy them or teachers buy them, and they are used as toys. And they should be presented and used as tools. This is a tool to help your body regulate instead of a toy, because if you just give it to a kid, they're going to use it how they want to. So it should be during a time that you know they need to focus and regulate. So like the fidget spinner, it's a lecture, the teacher's talking. I think that's an appropriate time to be at your desk and you can be spinning. A lot of teachers are still in that phase of demanding eye contact, and that's something to think about too. If your kiddo has a hard time processing visual information, it may be very demanding on their system to visually look at you and process auditory. But if I can look at a fidget spinner and I know exactly what to expect because it's just spinning in that circle, and I'm looking at that, then I might be able to process the auditory information better without looking at you. So I think for like those instances that I think it is beneficial. You just have to learn when are the appropriate times to use it and how to use it. And they're just so readily available that they are mostly used for toys now, and that's why I think teachers a lot of times will see them, they're like, oh, that's not useful. And it's not, because they're probably not using it appropriately. So you just have to know when is a good time and how to present it to the child. So, I'll look at some of these. So when children hit themselves in the head, what do we do to change the stimulation? Okay, that's a really common one too, and a really good question. So when we hit our head, whether we're doing it to ourselves or on the floor, cervical spine, we're giving input to our cervical spine, obviously our head too, but mostly you're getting that proprioceptive input right here, and that's how they're trying to regulate themselves. I'm not saying that there's not a behavior, like a true behavioral component to that, because children are so smart that they pick up very quickly that I'm gonna get a response from that. But if there is this underlying sensory it is that proprioceptive input. And so we need to find ways to target that. So I will usually, and every family should find their own verbiage for it, but typically I will say, you know, that's not safe, you can ask for a hug, or you can, I have like a hand vibration tool, and I will say, or you can use this, and they'll put it on the back of their neck. So giving them, how can we give that input to that cervical spine that's a safe way. Another thing to do is tummy time, go back to that tummy time, because if you're in tummy time, you have to extend your neck, and that's firing those receptors in your cervical spine. So that might be a good position to put a kiddo that likes to hit their head in, because then they're gonna get that constant input while they're coloring or, you know, doing whatever activity. It's to naturally give them a little bit of that input. But you have to redirect it and stay very consistent. So if you have a way that you wanna redirect it with, whether it's a vibration tool or bear hugs or, you know, some squeezes on the neck, just make sure every adult in that kiddo's life has that same verbiage and tools so that we can stay consistent with it, and they can then learn, like, I'm not gonna hit my head on the floor when I'm feeling overrated. I'm gonna come ask for that hug or some, you know, squeezes, or I'm gonna use my massage tool. Behavior issues versus sensory preferences. This is a hot topic, and this is where I really try to not look at everything through the sensory lens. I think that you have to look at the whole child and the whole family and the whole dynamic too, because like I mentioned earlier, kids are so smart, and they're gonna learn very quickly that, like, oh, I do this, and my mom or dad gives me this, or does this for me. So I think teasing out and figuring out, I usually encourage a lot of my families to like keep a journal of what behaviors they're seeing and what time of day or what environment it is, and then see if you can identify any patterns in it. Like, oh, look, it's always right when we go to Costco, or maybe it's right after we go to Costco. So they got so overstimulated, and that's what we were seeing. So you'll start to see patterns, and that's when it's easier to kind of tease out, is it behavior or is it sensory? And I would really recommend, if you're not sure that that is, when you probably want to seek out an OT so that they can look and do a full evaluation and really see, like, okay, what are the behaviors, what are the sensory things, and there might be a little bit of both. So, but that's a hard one. It's definitely a common topic in continuing ed for everyone too. So, ideas to regulate with heavy work to calm the body from running, yelling, general wildness indoors, mainly happens when overtired. Yeah, and this does happen a lot with kids that are overly tired, because they can't process their information when they are overly tired and fatigued. I think we can all probably agree that when we're overly tired, our temper's a little bit shorter with our children. And so I think that if you know your child's overly tired, trying to kind of grade your demands for your child and knowing, like, yeah, this is gonna be a harder day, and so those expectations and demands should be changed a little bit. Otherwise, you are going to trigger, you know, some of those meltdowns, and it will be a harder day for everybody. So really knowing when they are tired, their sensory system is just going to be out of whack. So, and then the ideas for the heavy work. I do have a list for everyone that will give some ideas, but I really encourage, if you feel like your kiddo needs a lot more heavy work, try and find ways to put it into your daily routine and their chores. It's going to be a lot easier, and you'll be able to be more consistent with it, rather than like, oh, every 2 hours we're going to stop and do our 10-minute obstacle course. I can't do that as a mom when I have one of my youngest is a sensory seeker, and I can't even do that with him. So now I have chores that he has morning and night that I know, like, at least he's getting the input he needs at those 2 times, because otherwise that follow through is going to be a lot more challenging for everyone. And then What do you suggest for young children who prefer dry, crunchy foods and also overstuffed foods? Yes. Okay. So dry, crunchy foods and overstuffing are both seeking proprioceptive input. And this could be because some kids will have like low tone, so it's harder for them to have that awareness of where the food is in their mouth. So if they overstuff and they get that extra proprioceptive input, then they know where the food is in their mouth, and it's easier for them to chew and then push the food back after it's prepped to swallow. So that's what happens a lot of times with kids that are overstuffing. It's like, I don't know that I have food in my mouth. Oh, now I do, and they look like a little chipmunk, but then it's unsafe to swallow. And that same goes with the crunchy and dry foods. It's giving that extra input. If there's a caveat to that. They might have a sensory preference to just dry crunchy because they don't like wet or mixed textures. So that could be something that you need to look at as well. But if it's just like they really enjoy that crunchiness, then that might be something that they're just seeking to regulate, which is something you can use as a tool. If you know they're going to be overstimulated going to church or the grocery store, giving them, a little baggie of hip peas or veggie sticks to crunch on and chew on while they're in the grocery store, it's going to help them stay a little bit more regulated while they're in the grocery cart or whatever. So you can kind of use some of those things to your advantage. And then I would just suggest for those kiddos that are overstuffing is you gotta alert and kind of wake up the mouth if they're doing it to kind of know where the food is in their mouth. So you can give them like really cold water, or if they like ice cubes, really cold, sour, salty foods kind of alert the mouth. So those are things you can think about. Sometimes, like my youngest loves lemons, and he will just eat raw or like whole lemons. And he's an overstuffer, so sometimes it looks mean, but I'll give him a lemon in the restaurant and he'll chew on it and then he's ready to go. So you just using those types of things to help alert and wake up the mouth, and then you'll have to train them also, like, okay, small bites, but soon they'll learn like, oh, if my mouth is awake and I know where the food is, I don't need to take these huge bites. So there's a little bit of behavior piece to that too. Please explain sensory seeker versus sensory avoider, and also how your child can be mixed. Yeah. So sensory seeker are those kids that are seeking out everything. So, touching the walls, running, jumping, you just see them trying to explore every sensory experience possible in their environment. Licking non-edible items, like, chewing on their clothing. Those are all seeking behaviors. So if you just think, anything that they can get their hands on to experience, that's what they're doing, and they're sensory seeking. Sensory avoiding, covering the ears, avoiding certain textures, different foods. Some kids don't like the bright lights, even sunlight, so they always want to have sunglasses on. Smells. Some kids will, you changed your deodorant and they're like, oh my gosh, you stink. And you're like, okay. So those are those sensory avoiders. You learn about
all of them.
Yeah.
What if the kid does have like all of those that you just said?
Yeah.
Should we
And
like the whole sensory, the smell, the touch, the everything,
like avoids all of them?
Yeah, like it bothers them in their day to day, like every single one of them. Smell, touch, jump, all that stuff you just mentioned.
Yeah. So I don't think you were here right at the
Probably
beginning.
not,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, that's okay. I talk about like there's sensory processing disorder, and that's like the thing that everyone always hears about, but then there's sensory differences. And I was saying earlier that I think it's important to know that we're all sensory human beings, and that's how we learn about our environment. And so learning what are the things that are highly impacting your day, and those are the things you really want to focus on. And if it is impacting his ability to play and engage with his peers and, experience new things or go do new things with you guys, then that is something that you probably want to discuss with a doctor, just so maybe you get an OT on board and they can help you work through those things so that your kiddo can learn to process that in an appropriate way, or have an appropriate behavioral response to it, because we don't want, kids are very honest, so they're gonna do it anyways, but you don't want your kiddo walking up to a stranger and be like, oh my gosh, you smell horrible, bleh, bleh, and gag. So helping them understand, how to, yes, this might stink, but what are, some strategies we can use to not have that reaction. Kids are very honest in the clinic. They are horrible to you. You have to have really thick skin because they just give it to you. So if it's something that is impacting like daily life, and you're like, gosh, I really wish we could. Some families will tell me we can't go out to eat at a restaurant because my kiddo can't handle all of the smells in a restaurant. If that's something that you guys truly want to do as a goal for you as a family, and that impacts you, then I would look into it, because there is help out there to help your kiddo understand what they're experiencing and have appropriate reactions to it. Yeah. So, but I also, as a mom, say pick your challenges. Like I gave the jeans and sweatpants. Like, kiddo won't wear jeans. Is that a priority in your life, or your kid has to wear jeans, within 6 months, or is that okay that my kid wears sweatpants? So, doesn't mean something's wrong. He's just sensitive to the experience. And then the last one was how your child can be mixed. So you're not just one way or another. Most kids do have some seeking behaviors and some avoiding behaviors. A typical one that I see is where they might avoid, auditory input, but then they seek that proprioceptive input. And that's just because that's how they've learned to regulate their body. And so that's what their sensory system uses is, I can't tolerate noise, but I know that if I go jump off the bleachers, I'm gonna get that input, and that just helps me feel a little bit better. So that's where you see kind of that mixed, and most kids are mixed. They're not one way or the other. We all, have a little bit of a mixture typically. That's all of the cards. Is there any further questions or?
I just want to say that was awesome. And my kids are all teenagers now, and I wish that I had heard this when they were younger. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
I do know one,
Yeah.
but she could probably elaborate or speak to it better.
Okay.
So the meltdowns.
Uh-huh.
So here's one. Like we go to WePlay.
Mhm.
He loves it.
Mhm.
We try and get him to come home like, okay, we're done, we're ready to go. Boom, meltdown every time, right? We've noticed that distraction sometimes helps, but is that the proper way to do it? Or how would you mitigate that?
So I would go back to trying to figure out, is the meltdown a sensory meltdown where, we are having sensory experiences that we can't, or is it a toddler behavior where I'm upset, like you're making me leave somewhere that I love? I know you kind of mentioned OT before, so sometimes that predictability, so I don't know if you've used like the visuals or something, or a visual timer, but those might be things to look at to help with that transition, because transitions can be hard for all children. And the toddler ages can be a little bit harder for those transitions, so I would try first probably tools for that, for those transitions from there, because WePlay is a great place to get, that sensory input. If you're noticing huge meltdowns and you were there for 3 hours, you might think, okay, let's cut it back to 2 and see if he does better with that transition, because there is such thing as too much sensory input. There's kind of a fine line of like, okay, this kid needs this input, or I just overloaded his system and now he's completely fatigued, and so we're gonna have that sensory meltdown anyways. So those are things I would kind of look at, like, did we have too much time in WePlay, or is this a typical toddler, I don't want to leave, or a hard transition? Does he have a hard time with like other transitions?
I just
say yes.
If it's something he really likes
Mhm.
or new, and he's having a lot of fun,
Mhm.
yeah, it is, but like, I don't know, the museum was fine.
I think that's just because we ran out of there. Yeah, I don't know, it's really hard to tell
No,
what
but
it is. It's leaving places, it's maybe mom being in the picture, you know, he gets away
What I
with
was
a lot of
telling
things
you.
with mom.
Yeah.
It's, oh wait, this is kind of funny, because I know what your reaction's gonna be like. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
No, but you know what, I think she hit it on the head, because I do notice that if we play less time, he doesn't have the number.
Yeah. So that might be that you guys, you know, you kind of just pushed it over that threshold of what's the just right amount. And that is something even in a clinical setting we have to play with because every kid is so different. So do they need 5 minutes of spinning or is it a kiddo that needs 20 minutes of spinning? So kind of playing with those times to find what is that just right amount. And then I would just say helping with that predictability, like, okay, 5 minutes, I have my timer on, 5 minutes, that's when we're transitioning and helping him process the changes. Might go far if, you know, that is really what's going on. Yeah.
We do that with people. We have people that overstimulate our children, so they only get 30 minutes a week.
Yeah.
Yes, not, but it's true.
No, that's awesome.
There's just some people that when our kids go there for more than an hour, they come back and they're a mess. And they're great people. Trust me, we love these people. It's just more like our kids can't because they don't know how to process everything that's going on at once.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. And some houses, like if you have a calm, quiet household and then you go to a household with 12 children and they're, you know, they're great and you want to play with them, but it's a lot to process, especially when that's not what you're typically used to. So that's fair.
For anything.
Yeah. Mine is Costco. I seriously dread Costco. It's a once a month trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like our kids, have a tough time getting OT services and qualifying for OT services. So I
Okay.
don't know,
So there's a huge shortage of OT.
yes, I do know
in
that.
the area. And so I know that there's other ways, especially if it's not more of a motor, you know, thing that we're working on is going on. There are other ways to get OT services. There is like some online virtual places you can reach out, and a lot of really good parent trainings that you can do online to maybe at least get you started while you're waiting on the wait list, because it can be hard to get into different clinics. As far as qualifying, in the clinical side, that would surprise me because typically we look at the family and the child holistically and like if there's things impacting your, you know, everyday life. Typically there's, you know, at least some strategies and stuff we can work on. But I'm happy to share any of the online resources that I have, at least that way you guys have something to go back to and can look into while you're on a wait list or seeking out some of those online services. Sensory stuff can be really coachable or virtually, especially in the home, because we can see like, you see that couch there? Great, take off that cushion, we're gonna do this. Or, you know, do you have that pillowcase? And that's stuff that can carry over into your daily life rather than, we've got this great swing and monkey bars in our clinic, but you don't have that at home. So sometimes it can be more beneficial, so that might be another option to look into is some
Yeah, I love those
online.
resources, okay.
So.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. It was wonderful to meet everybody.
Do you wanna talk about those bags?
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. So there is some lovely little gift bags here, for everybody. And there's 3 items in here. Thank you. The first one is a stress ball. So proprioceptive input, tactile. So if you have a kiddo that maybe is having trouble at dinner or needs in the car even is a good one, then you know you can use a stress ball. Obviously present it as a tool. This is to help your body stay calm. The jewelry is what they call it, and these are different necklaces like that these are available, for the kid to wear. So that way it's easy redirectable, easy to redirect to. Because a lot of kids, some kids will bite themselves or they'll bite their shirt, and then if they're wearing this, it's very easy to redirect. So, nope, we don't bite our shirt, but you can bite on this, and helping them redirect and learn.
Or the implant, my son was implant is not,
Say what?
the implant, the cochlear
Oh,
implant.
yes,
Chew on the cords and stuff.
yeah, so I would redirect.
Leo.
Yeah, I would redirect to this, so no, you can't chew on that, and it's nice because it's breakaway, so if it gets caught on something, it's just gonna snap off.
You can wash it.
Yep, and it's food grade silicone, so they're safe. And then the other one is just a fidget. I didn't recommend fidget spinner, because those are everywhere, but, these are really nice too. It's just a tactile visual thing that they can play with. But again, use these structured. You don't want them to just have free use to all of this. It's using it when we need to. So when you're gonna have them sit down and do something that you're demanding and you know it's gonna overload their system or they're gonna be frustrated, for like a homework activity or whatever, having that available. So I can see you're frustrated, you get a 1 minute break and then you can hand it to them to play with or chew on. And then, okay, let's put it down so we can finish our work. So you always want to have kind of a means to the end. So you can use this to regulate, but we still have to be productive and do what we need to do.
I actually have a last minute question. Is it possible for a child to have this issue while they're sleeping?
Like they don't sleep all through the night or have trouble
Yeah.
going to sleep.
Like, well, ours, I mean, it seemed at first like maybe he was just itchy and he'd just scratch.
Okay.
And he did have bug bites. And so we were like, okay, maybe it's just that. But
Yeah.
they'll
I
dry
mean,
out and he's still scratching through the night. It'll wake us up, it'll wake him up.
Have you, so it could be like a tactile thing that maybe yeah, I mean, you can have it in your sleep. So a lot of kids, that's why they have like weighted blankets and things like that. You can also look at like the brushing protocol, which helps desensitize skin, especially if he's having trouble. You might try a different material of sheets. That might change it, if that's what's going on. I'm also just from a mom standpoint thinking like detergent, make sure you're not changing like detergents, those types of things. But I would try maybe changing the type of sheets and seeing if that helps. If it is a tactile thing, that could be kind of that easy fix to help. You can also do like squeezes, like a massage.
Yes, he does love to be hugged
Okay.
at night when he like wakes up or something. He wants a hug.
So you might prep his body for sleep by doing like squeezes to give him a little bit more input and help his body, because the squeezes are gonna kind of turn off those tactile receptors in his skin for a little bit, so it might help him with that.
You mentioned the child not making eye contact because they're processing and because they're having a hard time listening. And mine does that. So when she's listening to me, she's not making eye contact with me, and sometimes I do make her make eye contact, not all the time, but do I just let her listen to me if she's like focusing really hard to just, stare off into it where she's staring, or do I get down on her level and talk to her face to face? How do I approach that?
I wouldn't demand the eye contact. I would, if she's able to follow what your verbal directions that you gave her, and with her staring off, then then that's probably what she's doing, is she's just has to put all of her effort into processing auditory, and so we have to take away that visual input, because our faces give a lot of input. That's why we read faces, right? And so she might have to kind of turn that off to be able to understand auditory. So I wouldn't demand that. I mean, I would still get down on her level, but don't demand that. She might at some point start to bring back that visual eye gaze to you, and that's great. But I'd be at her level so that it's available, but I wouldn't demand it. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.